Welcome to the Life Is podcast, where creativity, culture, mindset, and intentional living come together through real conversation. I'm your host, Coy Brown. Each week, I sit down with entrepreneurs, artists, athletes, travelers, and visionaries who didn't stumble into a life they love, they built it. We go deep into how they think, how they reconstructed themselves, and what became possible on the other side. This is not just about what people have accomplished. It's about the internal work that made it sustainable. Because when you build from the inside out, life expands. Let's get into it. This week, I'm sitting down with someone whose path to becoming a physicist started not in a lab, but behind the wheel of a rental car. Dr. Emily Grace was the fastest growing manager at Enterprise before she made a pivot that most people around her probably did not see coming. She went back to school, earned a bachelor's degree in physics, a master's in secondary education, and nearly finished a math degree, all while conducting dark matter research and presenting at global physics conferences. Today, she studies the contamination in Miami's brownfields and mangroves with a laser. She is building a 4,000 optical tweezing setup so that underfunded schools can do the same research as the universities with full grant support. She funds her own work through private donors because she wants to be free to ask the questions that grant cycles cannot afford to let her ask. She has built a student research program that grew from 3 participants to over 50, with 30 of those students presenting at a global physics summit. She navigates science and faith side by side without forcing them to fight. She grew up moving constantly, has been through divorce and family instability, and has sat in rooms where she was not always expected to be, and she kept going. This is what it looks like when someone follows what is actually true for them, through every environment that tried to define them otherwise. All right. Well, good afternoon and welcome back to another episode of the Life Is podcast, hosted by myself, Coy Brown. And today we have a pleasure of having Dr. Emily Grace sit down with us. She is a physicist, dark matter researcher, environmental biophysics educator, a science equity advocate, and lastly, a faith and science bridge builder. So a lot of credentials, a lot of great things she's doing. I'm super excited, honestly, to get in today's podcast, just because maybe I'm a little science nerd, so I enjoy the science. And for those who are tuning in, I hope you do as well. But without further ado, Emily, it's great to have you on the podcast. And more importantly, how are you feeling?
Well, thank you so much for that lovely introduction. I'm doing great. I'm excited to have this conversation.
Yes, likewise. No, I'm excited. It's been time, in time for waiting for this to come, and we finally made it happen. So we're ready to move forward. Well, as we get going, if you can, like all guests that come on the show, for those who are getting to know you, right, because you're brand new here, if you can kind of just tell people who Dr. Emily Grace is, where you started, what you do in the world right now, and what brought you up to this specific place in the world, which I know is a loaded question, but I'll give you time to kind of unravel there and give us the give us the picture there.
All right, so I'm going to focus mostly on my physics journey.
Yes.
So I have been in the field of physics really since 2008.
Hmm.
My background and how I got started in physics, I've actually been interested in science from a young age. So when I was in elementary school, I said I wanted to do science. Specifically, I wanted to be a chemist because I didn't know what physics was at that particular time. And I unfortunately, like a lot of children, and unfortunately, particularly female children, I
Yeah.
got a lot of discouragement
Yep.
from pursuing physics, science, and then later on physics. So in high school, I had 2 high school teachers who really changed my life. I did go back later and tell them that, but
Hmm.
I had so I moved high schools between my sophomore and junior year, and I ended up in Mr. Spear's chemistry class in New Jersey.
Uh-huh.
And because I had moved from one school to the other, I had been misplaced into the science level. So
Yep.
I'd been placed into a regular science class, and I spent the whole year breaking the curve, generally being hated by my classmates. And I had decided that I was just not going to take science my senior year because that had been my 3rd science class in high school where I had been uninterested, bored, and
Yeah.
disliked by my classmates. And my chemistry teacher said, "You're going to take advanced physics. I've already signed the paperwork for you to go in.
Oh, wow. Okay.
You don't have
Yeah.
a
Yeah. Like,
choice in this
don't have a choice.
matter."
You're
Uh,
going.
so I entered Mr. Stephen Gabrowski's physics class, and I really fell in love with the subject. And I remember thinking while I was in that class my senior year. This would be something that I would like to study. At
Hmm.
the time, I felt a little bit trapped. I'd already applied to colleges, and the schools I'd mostly applied for didn't really have physics degrees.
Right.
My first year of college, there were two classes I wanted to take. I wanted to take calculus, and I wanted to take a semester of calculus-based physics, and I was told by my parents that that would be an absolute waste of my time because I would never use either one of those classes again. And besides, I was the wrong personality to go into
Right.
science.
Right.
Um, and so I ended up majoring in psychology, which was fine.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed the research side of psychology. I mean, it's ended up coming in handy
Yeah. Definitely.
in my life, so it wasn't a waste. Although sometimes when I pay those student loans, I question that.
Right. Don't we
Uh,
all?
yes. So then I graduated. I went into sales. I was very successful. I worked for Enterprise Rent a Car. I was one of the top salespeople in the state of Indiana. I was one of their youngest employees at the time, so I was promoted very quickly. And
Hmm.
I realized I was at this intersection where I could be very successful in
Right.
business, but I wasn't happy. And because so I was 17 when I started college and I graduated early. So I was still actually pretty young. I was
Dang.
only
Yeah.
about 22. And I thought, if I want to go back and try physics, it's only going to get harder. And I'm still pretty young. I can still do new
Hmm.
things. And so I found a part time job, quit my job at Enterprise, met with the admissions department at Indiana University South Bend. Originally, my thought was to be a high school teacher because I wasn't sure I could do enough physics to become anything more than that. And if you
Right.
go into any education department and you say, I'm interested in teaching physics and math, they're basically going to give you a hug right then and there.
Hmm.
Um,
Right.
so I walked into my first college level physics classroom. It'd been about 6 years since I'd taken physics. I was a few years away from the last time I took calculus. So I did actually finally fit in a
Hmm.
calculus class, which I did not do well in because most people don't take calculus as psych majors their senior year while taking a full load and working full time.
Yeah. Crazy.
Unsurprisingly, it wasn't my best class. Um, and I wasn't sure if I was capable of passing the class, but I had an incredible professor, Dr. Monica Linker, who's still at Indiana University South Bend. She is one of my heroes in physics. She not only, saw me as someone to educate, but she really saw the journey that I was on,
Yes.
and taught me more than just physics, but really helped me deal with a lot of the insecurities that I was facing, the mental and emotional
Hmm.
that it meant to be in that class. And um, it turns out I didn't fail. Um,
Right.
and I started taking more and more classes, really fell in love with it, started doing dark matter research at Indiana University South Bend, and then made the transition from pursuing. At the time, I was in the transition to teaching program, so I switched over to pursuing a physics degree with the intent of going to graduate school. When I made that decision, I was actually pretty deep into my education degree as well. So I ended up
Yeah.
getting a bachelor's of science simultaneously with a master's in secondary education. Um, and then I applied to a variety of different graduate schools. And while I at Indiana University South Bend, I spoke at several conferences. I was honored to be included in a couple different publications, and then I got into my first choice graduate program, which was at Royal Holloway University of London, where I continued my dark matter research. So I graduated with my PhD in 2018. I started working for liberal arts colleges.
Hmm.
I did a year at a school in Kansas. I did a postdoc in dark matter at Penn State. Then I spent 5 years at a tiny little school in Iowa and basically kind of outgrew my position while I was there. And I
Yeah.
ended up getting plot twist. I got headhunted by an independent high school, and since being there, I have grown what is one of the largest high school research programs in the country.
That's
So
amazing.
that's my journey in a very tiny nutshell.
Yes. No, I appreciate, like I said, you gave us the whole arc. You gave everything, and we're going to dive into it, kind of open it up a little more, but no, it's a great journey. I know we're going to talk about it going forward, just your perseverance and the pivots and just where you got today. So no, it's awesome. And honestly, I didn't even know IU South Bend had a dark matter like department.
I'm gonna shout out that physics department.
Yeah,
To
shout
any
out to your teacher too, your
South
professor.
Bend physics department is phenomenal. The faculty there are incredibly talented. They are accomplished researchers in their own right, and the amount that they care and invest in their students. I mean, it's been so I graduated in 2011. I can
Hmm.
still reach out to any one of them, and they will help me on my next step of my career.
See, that's
Uh,
amazing. That's what you want. Like teachers, professors like that will help you. They're not just like, oh, you're gone. Do your own thing.
So if you're in the South Bend area and you're listening to this and you're thinking about doing physics seriously, um, IUSB incredible. Go
Yeah,
there. It I had a better experience than students who went to more prestigious undergraduate programs. And I had more research opportunities.
absolutely. Yeah, more intimate too. So shout out to IUSB.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is wild because I know for those who are listening, you're not from South Bend
No.
originally, so it's just kind of ironic that you were here for a short period of time. All right, so I want to kind of move back a little bit, right? You gave us the whole story
Mhm.
in a nutshell. We're going to unpack this, but as you mentioned, right, you started off at Enterprise, a great company, right?
Mhm.
You were obviously fastest growing manager from a young age, and obviously that's nothing to kind of scoff at, because you're doing really well. I guess when you got to that path, right, you're going through that path, and then you pivoted, right, to physics. What was
Mhm.
actually maybe pulling you away from that track that was clearly working, right? So you're aware, like, okay, I'm doing really well in sales. I could probably go do this. You said you weren't happy, you didn't want to do this, but like, what was kind of pulling you more to like, maybe I want to dabble in the physics?
Um, so I mean, the truth is I was bored. I
Yeah,
think one of the things I always tell people if they're interested in physics, the thing about, academia, you don't choose academia, academia chooses you.
right.
And you do it because you really can't do anything else. Like for me, I wanted to be challenged every single day.
Hmm.
And while there's certainly challenges in business, it's also fairly repetitive. And also, I struggled to find a deeper meaning in what I was doing.
Yeah.
Uh, and so that really motivated a lot of the pivoting and that, and I didn't mention this before, but, I think part of why I stayed with the psych major. So when I was in college, I went through a personal crisis. My parents got divorced. We found
Yep.
out my dad was living a double life, and so when you're in the middle of a crisis, it's really hard to think bigger than that, and so when I was working, I was a little bit further removed from that, and I think that time of healing gave me a chance to really think more clearly about the things that were
Hmm.
gonna make me really happy, and then also it gave me some courage to see if this was something that was actually gonna make me happy.
Yeah.
Because when I went into physics, I didn't know if it was gonna work, and I knew that if it didn't work, I would have to pull out and start working
Yeah.
in again.
Yeah, 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 exactly. Yeah. Well, it's good because you knew like that wasn't you wanted a more deeper intrinsic, type of purpose. There's
Mhm,
just you knew deep down this wasn't satisfying, wasn't challenging enough. And like you said, business is a different challenge than I would say science, physics.
mhm.
It's just a different cup of tea. And I think
Yeah.
finding that, your own flavor, your own field is important. So yeah, good awareness on your part. My next question here, right? You went back to school, obviously, for physics after being successful, as I already mentioned there. And of course, you're going to a new field. I wouldn't say new field, but a new beginning, right? As you're
Mhm,
going into physics as a beginner again, as you mentioned, in a field that can be kind of unforgiving about who it expects to belong there. And we'll get
mhm.
to that. What did you have to be willing to like maybe let go of or be seen in order to make that transition?
Can you elaborate a little bit more on that question?
Yeah. So as you're going to physics, was there anything that maybe you had to let go? We spoke of insecurities a little bit. So
Mhm,
you're at this pivot point, you're at this fork of like, okay, here's where I want to
mhm.
go. was there anything that you had to let go of to say, hey, this is what I want to do in physics, or anything that had to be seen, maybe internally or externally, that, hey, to make this transition work? That makes sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. So, I mean, for me, I had to really work on my sense of self.
Yeah.
When you've been told that you have a certain level of intelligence for most of your life, you have certain capabilities, and now you're doing something outside of that.
Mhm.
It's a combination of both focusing on the way that you talk to yourself, but also um, you have to prove to yourself that you can be there. And I
Absolutely.
remember I had to do both. So it was both, when I would do well on an exam or an assignment, I'd have to say, okay, like you need to remember this, you need to remember you did well. And then it was
Yep.
also, I remember when I was like many teenage girls, I was insecure about my appearance in high school. And one of my friends would be like, you need to tell yourself every day you look pretty in the mirror, which
Yeah,
does
yeah.
work.
It does.
Uh,
Oh, there's
but
science
then I
behind it.
had to do the same thing in physics. It's like, all right, Emily, you're not stupid. Like you can do
Mhm.
this. And it's hard because there's a lot of ego in physics. Physics is a very male dominated field, and the way
Yep.
that men pump themselves up is very different than the way a lot of women tend to pump themselves up. So,
I agree.
when you're surrounded by mostly men who are pumping themselves up in a way that really isn't conducive to the way that you think about yourselves, like you have to find your own path. And actually, one of the things I did my second year in the program is I looked around at my other physics majors, realized everybody was kind of stressed and nervous about their courses. And I said, okay, we can either like all be in competition and all do worse, or we
Mhm.
could all study together and build each other up, and maybe we could all do better. So I ended up building this really core group of students
Mm.
where we would all study together. We learned by teaching each other. We
Yep.
learned by encouraging one another. As a result, all of us actually did
Get
really
better.
well. I think
Yeah.
um, for me, at least, I did better than I would have without them. But it really changed the temperature of the department. It's
Mhm.
actually something, now that I work with students, I tell them you're in charge of the atmosphere that you're going into in your program. So,
For sure.
if you go there and you find it overly competitive and it's making you do worse, you actually can change that because a lot of people will be relieved that they
Yeah.
don't have to
Yes.
compete so fiercely if you just give them permission. And so that ended up being a big part of it. And actually, most of us have been at either each other's weddings or other big life events. So we ended
That's
up
awesome.
making
Yeah.
big friends while, doing Taylor series together.
Okay. All right. Even better. Even better. But that's awesome. You took charge of that. Like, a pack of batteries is stronger than just one, right?
Mhm.
And it was interesting because you said that. Me knowing a little bit about your story, it was nice how you took that at a young age, and now you're doing it as a teacher, kind of on the flip end as a professor there, helping other students do the same thing, saying, "Hey, you have control of that." And I think a lot of kids maybe, I wouldn't say they're not aware of it. I just think, like you said, the field's so competitive. There's a lot of ego, and so you kind of lose that sense of like, oh, we can have some autonomy and authorship to change this. It doesn't have to be this course
Right.
of action. We can go a different route, and we shape that. Like, we shape that process. So I think that's important for those who want to go in the field.
Yeah, and I think, that was actually a benefit of being a slightly older student.
Yeah, maturity.
The game really changes when you're paying for your own education and
Yeah,
you
it's a
had
little,
to
little
leave
different.
a good paying job to be there, which, I think, sometimes when I think about my own journey and, whether or not it should have gone directly into physics, I mean, it's true it would have saved me a lot of money if I would have gone directly into physics, but I was definitely in a better state of mind when
Hmm.
I went back.
Yeah, all the experiences we go through. I mean, all these people we have on the show is like everything built you up to where you're at now. Or there's micro moments that have built you up, that provided the tools, the resources, the knowledge to where you're at now. So it's never a wasted time. Essentially, what I'm getting at, it wasn't wasted. Yeah. Just really a quick question though before we move to the next one. Like, how did the people around you maybe respond? Like when you made that shift, like, hey, I'm getting out of business. I want to go straight to physics. And did their like responses affect you internally on your decision?
Um, So there were a couple of, I mean, I think my family thought I was crazy, but I mean, that was part of the journey I was on. They were the ones that told me I couldn't do it.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
The motivation.
so I was at the time married to what is now my ex-husband. I think, he, it was not a good
Yeah.
situation. I honestly feel like, that decision to go back to school to do physics was actually part of what was me establishing my own autonomy. So I don't remember him being really supportive or unsupportive. I think he was
Yeah.
kind of different. Um, so I think it was, and then I think some of my friends just thought I was crazy. I mean, a few people thought it made sense, and a few people just thought it was insane.
Right.
And I think those are all the memories I really have from that perspective. I mean, it took in some ways several years to convince some people that I was doing well. I know when I was still in undergrad, I gave a talk at MIT that was really well received, and I think that's when people in my life started to shift a little bit. That
Mm-hmm.
maybe I was actually better at this than they thought that I could
Yeah.
be. But when people have a perception of who you are, and that's been ingrained for years.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
takes a little while for them to really see you differently. But for me, it was that I think that in some ways plays the pieces that I still build on now because I'm sure we'll get to it, but I radically shifted my research focus. And a big part of being able to do that really came from the fact that it's like, all right, I've done really difficult things. I've learned really challenging fields and I've always managed to do it. So I need to remember that I shouldn't think that this should be any different.
Exactly.
Which is honestly how, I mean, imposter syndrome is so common in physics, especially among women and minorities. That that's actually a way to deal with it is to recognize that I'm going to feel insecure, I'm going to doubt myself, but I need
Yep.
to remember that I've always been able to do this, so this shouldn't be an exception. Actually, one of the most freeing things I
Yeah.
ever heard was at a conference. There was an MIT, fully tenured MIT professor who said, so it was a women in physics conference. He
Yeah.
said, "Ladies, by the way, if you think imposter syndrome is going to go away, let me tell you now, I still can't believe I have this position." And it actually was a really healthy thing to hear
Yeah.
because sometimes you feel really guilty about the fact that you're constantly doubting yourself. And then to hear it affirmed that no, like most people in this field doubt themselves, they've just learned how to make that just a part of the process. So,
Mm-hmm.
conference now, and I'm actually very open about this with my students. Like, I'm going to go through a hump where about a week and a half before the conference, I'm going to doubt everything I'm writing. I'm going to feel like I don't belong there, and it's normal.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah. Yeah.
normal, and I'm just going to ride that wave, and then it's going to be fine. And I'm sharing this with you because I can see that you're in the middle of this wave, and I just want you to know you don't need to feel bad that you feel insecure.
Exactly.
And if you can never get this under control, it's fine. You just have to learn to ride it out and realize you're
Mm-hmm.
doing okay.
Yeah. That's some good therapy work here. That we can take that away, even for myself. 'Cause, yeah, I think we all go through that. But I,
Yeah.
I love that. Like you said it earlier, and you just said it a little bit now. But almost like keeping these micro wins, like these small wins, to look back because it is very much we forget, we doubt, we criticize. Self judgment can be louder than the successes that you've done, and to go back on like that book of wins is can help you kind of stay like afloat, and you like remind yourself, hey, I've done these things, I've done the hard things, I've done well in these exams, these tests, I know what I'm doing, and yeah, just keep yourself kind of built up because it's easy to get knocked down, it's easy to compare, it's easy to see your colleagues or what have you, and it's like, yeah, it's just hard, right? We're human, so it's okay. I think that's the big thing. It's okay. You're gonna go through this roller coaster of emotions, um, but you'll come out of it, right? You'll come out of it.
Yeah.
All right. So you conducted dark matter research, right? And presented at conferences as you mentioned, and you've talked about proving detractors, right? Some of those people that doubted you wrong as a part of that journey. Um, if you're willing to share, who were those detractors, and what were they saying or implying about whether you belonged in physics?
So mostly I heard some things about I think in my family, they were dealing with their own insecurities, and so they were putting it on me.
Yep.
I had a family member say, "Well, I wasn't good at math, so you're not gonna be able to do it either."
Mm.
Um, I mean, it's not true. I ended
Yeah,
up,
I'd say it's not true at all.
in addition to my bachelor's in physics, I was actually 2 classes shy of a BA in mathematics, and it was really just that, I needed to graduate and
Yeah.
work before my PhD that I did just chose not to finish that. Um, and I think some of it is, and I ended up doing my master's thesis on this, the idea of the personality types that belong in science. So first of all, any
Mm.
personality type can
That's
do science.
interesting.
It's really
Yeah.
just a matter of, are you passionate about it? And so I also had family members that just saw me as being the wrong personality to do science.
Weird.
Now, having been in physics, I can tell you I'm a little bit more extroverted than most physicists, and that's
Yeah.
really the only thing about me that's very different. Um, and also I am a woman. Like, there's not a ton of us in physics, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But it was, I had to recognize that, what makes a good physicist is that good physicists are people who are curious. They're people who are willing to
Mhm.
do things where they might fail. And I think that's also where some of the family detractors came from. I have family members who are perfectionists,
Yeah.
who would be afraid to try something if the risk of failure was high. Having taught now, I taught college for years, and I've generally learned that perfectionist students do not tend to make good physics majors because it is a field that will
Yeah, yeah, there's a lot.
you're going to be wrong at
Yeah.
some point,
Yep.
probably many times. And so you have to, I tell my students who are interested, it's like you need to be the type of person. It's like, well, that problem looks impossible. Okay, I'm gonna try it
Mhm.
anyways.
Yeah,
Like
yeah,
that's
literally.
and I am not a perfectionist. I'm hardworking, but I'm not a perfectionist. And so between that and the curiosity, I realized that I actually did have the right personality type, and it was really that other people are kind of misinformed in
Yeah.
terms of what it takes, and that was, I think in a lot of ways writing that master's thesis on, so it was focused on stereotype threat anxiety, or sorry, stereotype threat anxiety with math and physics anxiety, and really looking at the way that physicists and mathematicians are portrayed. And you look at the way they're portrayed in media, that's really not
Yeah,
what a lot of physicists are like. I mean, the stereotypes exist for a reason, but that doesn't actually encapsulate the field. I
yeah,
think in some ways doing that really was a way of me making peace with my own background and the things that had been said to me.
yeah. No, absolutely. Yeah, your thesis sounds interesting. I was like, "Man, that'd be good to read." But, yeah, no, it's absolutely right. Um, in what you said earlier too, I think people, project and put things on you that's not true, which happens all the time, but it's unfortunate because it's like that's not the reality. Um,
Mhm,
and, you talked about it earlier, having other people support you more than the people around you.
mhm.
Families or friends where it's like your professors are like, "Look, you have something within you, like, we we want you to succeed." So, yeah, it's always, interesting to see, the support and encouragement from where it comes from. But, no, I appreciate you sharing that answer. Alright, so I wanna transition kinda more to your research, right, as we move forward. Kinda what you're actually studying and why it matters, right? That's the important part here. So your research shifted from dark matter to environmental biophysics,
Mhm.
studying contamination in Miami's brownfields, mangroves, measuring heavy metals, metal stress in plants, assessing coastal ecosystems, right? What connected those 2 things for you? And what is kind of that through line, if you will, between the fundamental physics of dark matter and the applied environmental work you're doing now?
All right. So, to explain this transition, I have to go a little bit more into
Yeah,
my career background because this really came out of um, what I was observing in physics, particularly in who wasn't doing physics. So I did dark matter for my PhD. I did a postdoc in dark matter, and um, this isn't something that's a secret and it's not something I hide. There is unfortunately a lot of toxic people and kind of abusive people in physics. And
Mhm.
sadly, several of them ended up directly in my path. Um,
Jeez.
and so when I got my first professorship, I was thinking about where I wanted to take my career, and I was realizing that um, in some ways I had been a little bit done with the field of dark matter for a while. So I've always been more of a an experimentalist. I really do like to be on um I've called myself a hardware physicist for a long time. Like, I like to be on the side of building experiments. That to me is
Mhm.
what I find the most fulfilling, the most interesting. And dark matter had moved towards this large collaboration side where it was a lot of more analysis, a lot more algorithms and models, which
Yeah.
are fine, but that's just not what I'm as interested in. And that combined with um the personalities that I was finding in the field, that I just was becoming less and less interested in the actual work. At my first, well, technically, I did have another position before that, but I did that in my final year of my PhD.
Yeah.
So my first post PhD professorship position. I was looking around my department and I realized that there were all these female faculty members who had left their research behind and they had chosen to go into teaching at a liberal arts college because it offered a better work-life balance than a traditional academic
Mhm.
track. And I thought to myself, for as much as I read about how people are just baffled as to why they can't keep their women in these traditional academic paths. I
Right.
thought it's because the way that we do research isn't actually congruent with typical female choices. And I would be in these meetings where men would say, well, women just need to basically behave like men. And I would think to myself, like,
Mm.
do you want more men in physics
Yeah.
who, happen to have a female figure? Or do you want women in physics where we do things like have babies and need to physically recover from
Yep.
that?
Yep. Really.
And so I thought, you know, if what we have now isn't working, then we need to build something different.
Yeah.
There are people
Sure.
fighting from the inside and it's a long slog, and I tried that. And so, now that I'm not on the inside, I'm going to build something different.
Mm.
And I'm going to normalize healthy research. And so I started speaking with my colleagues so I was the only physicist at this college. And so I spoke with my colleagues who were in fields like biochemistry and biology. And I started thinking, I have this background in hardware, I can build equipment, I know how to do it cheaply. Can I help solve some of their research questions with
Right.
what I bring to the table? And so from there, I started going into the field of biophysics. So I was, I'm now a member of the Division of Biological Physics for the American Physical Society. And I always joke that I really don't know any biology, but I'm open to learn anything they want to teach me about it. Um,
Right. Right.
and so I started looking at the technologies that I could develop that could make biological measurements like optical tweezing, which is basically where you use a laser and a microscope to manipulate nanoparticles so you can study their properties. Uh,
Mhm.
and so while I was at that school, I ended up building. I built a lot of things. I built and recruited two majors. I revitalized their dual degree engineering program, built this research department, and then realized as I looked around, it was like, I've been here for 5 years. I don't think I can build anything more. And I'm
Yeah.
not really sure this college wants to grow.
Right.
and
Right. Right.
well, which happens. It was a learning lesson for me. I've learned that, like, not all workplaces are actually after excellence.
Mhm.
And if you're someone who is really intense and pushes really hard, you actually need to be at an intense workplace. And that was something that I had a mentor of mine tell me years ago, and I didn't realize how true it was until I was in a position where I realized, I'm working really hard at this college and I'm working a lot harder than anybody else here.
Right.
And I'm getting, I'm like blowing these numbers out of the park and no one seems to care. That's can be a really normal thing that happens, and that's really just a sign that you are more intense than this company and you need to move to a different company, and
Yep.
that's fine. And the answer is to move to a different company.
Yeah.
Uh,
Now.
they're not gonna meet you.
Yeah.
And so that's when, I ended up working at the school that I'm at now, which I wasn't expecting. I had looked for different college positions. I'd gotten some offers. I had accepted one, and that started to go south. And then I got headhunted by this independent school, who was very, so independent high schools. These are the high schools where they charge an exorbitant tuition, but in exchange for that, they really do hire like
Yeah.
everyone I work with at this school is incredibly talented, incredibly qualified. It is an intense workplace, so everybody there is pretty intense. Numbers matter.
Yeah.
So if you're someone who really wants to push hard, you've got room to really push hard. And they were very open to my vision of developing research. So I told them, is like, if you're interested in me, um, yes, I can teach, but I will develop a research program. So you need to
Mm-hmm.
be on board with that, or this is not going to be a good fit for either one of us. And they were on board. And so once I started there, I really leaned hard into environmental biophysics for a couple of different reasons. One, it is very practical, and I find with young students, you don't want to start them on theoretical physics research. It's
Mm-hmm.
the amount of knowledge they need to have to do that is a lot higher than where they're going to be at. Whereas hardware physics is obtainable even to students who haven't taken physics. They
Correct.
can understand how to put things together, and at the end of the day, what for me personally has defined my physics journey is that I'm just very curious, and I can be curious about really almost anything.
Yeah.
And so I just applied that to learning about things like, so as you said, I am doing a study where we're looking at different developed and undeveloped, or developed and areas that were previously developed in Miami to look
Mm-hmm.
at metal toxins in the soil. We're doing a deep dive study on urban mangroves, their contaminants, their health. I'm collaborating with a physicist at Georgia Tech to use
Mm.
robotics to do a deeper exploration in mangroves. And really, the through line for all of this is, what questions are meaningful, what questions are obtainable for younger researchers to answer.
Yep.
And also, I feel like at this independent school where I don't have to apply for grants. In fact, I'm not allowed to apply for grants.
Mm-hmm.
My research, they're going to evaluate my research solely based on the student experiences, and I feel like that's a gift where I should ask
Absolutely.
bold questions that are difficult to get funded in the traditional grant environment. So I think the question about the contaminants in urban mangroves is very important. That's a
Yeah.
difficult question to get funded. And since I don't rely on that external funding, I feel like I'm in a good position with my students to go after answers. In fact, actually yesterday I did a full field day in the mangroves where we mapped out every health metric we could
I
in
love
one
it. I love it.
tiny mangrove uh, little area.
Yeah.
And so that really drove the work that I was doing. And I worked with the equipment that was already at the school, and I made proposals to bring newer equipment on. I speak annually at the American Physical Society Global Summit, and I also speak at the Division of Op- sorry, d- Atomic, Molecular, and Optical Physics. And I really take advantage of that to connect with my peers, really to help get ideas of meaningful work that
Mm-hmm.
um, that's really accessible to younger researchers. And then part of what I do when I go there is I really advocate for younger researchers, because I found a
Yes.
lot of faculty members do not believe that high school students or even very young undergraduates are capable of doing meaningful original research.
Yep.
And my experience has been that if you give people the opportunity, if they're really passionate, they can start solving original questions. It does take a little bit more work as a supervisor, both in terms of what you have to teach them. And
Yes.
I think because I had to go on my own emotional journey, I'm very sensitive to my students' emotional journeys. And when you work with younger students, you do have to do a lot more walking through of like, I know you feel really confused and you're going to feel totally confused for probably about 4 months. And if you're still interested in 4 months from now, you're in the right place.
Yes.
If this is miserable, that's a sign that, maybe you enjoy your science classes, but actually being a scientist isn't for you. And that's one thing I really emphasize with the exposure to research is that research, being exposed to scientific research is really a gateway to finding out if you actually like the
Mhm.
work in the field. Because I think there's a lot of fields where you get more exposure to what it's like to work in a field in your classes.
For
Science
sure.
is one of them. The experience of being in a lab is very different than the experience being in a classroom.
Yep.
Um, and the skills it takes to be a successful researcher are only somewhat the same skills that it takes to be successful in the classroom. And I find that, by giving students a chance to be in a lab, sometimes I have these students who are only okay in the classroom, but are just phenomenal researchers. And all of a sudden, they're realizing they have what it takes to actually do the work in the field. And it
Mhm.
gives their classroom experience more meaning. It doesn't necessarily improve their grades, but that's okay because they
Yeah.
can really do the work. And then I've also had the reverse. I've had students who are really good in the classroom that go into a lab and they don't have the interest, they don't have the constitution for research. It's not like I had one student say, I wanted to be engineer and now I've done research and I want to go into finance. And I was like, that's amazing. I am
Right.
so glad that we straightened this out.
Yeah. Yeah, right. We know exactly where you wanna go. Yeah, that's important, but to your point, I think, every student needs to start somewhere. I think, and everyone, even these physicists, right? I'm sure you can attest to that are in higher stature. They started from somewhere.
Mhm.
Some are probably a little more naturally gifted academic wise, but giving that access, the accessibility, right? The
Mhm.
equity for people to get
Mhm.
into, like we have to create this bridge. As I kind of give an
Absolutely.
introduction, there's got to be this bridge to get them there. If not, there's going to continue to be this gap in the field and a gap in the work potentially, and kind of moving the field forward.
Absolutely. And that really hits the nail on the head because that's the thing is that a lot of research programs are pretty competitive, especially if you're younger. And what you're doing with these competitive programs is you're eliminating students who might be really good. Because there's all
Yeah,
kinds of
discouraging. Yeah.
reasons why people are not going to look as good on paper. I had a student, he just graduated this past year with a master's in engineering from WashU in St. Louis.
Oh yeah, great.
Um, he wouldn't have had amazing.
Yeah, that's
When
title.
I
I do. That's Ivy school almost. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. When I first had him in my physics classroom, he was I think he'd be okay if I said this, a failing pre-med student. He came from a little tiny school in Iowa, before that with terrible math, like no access to better math teachers. So it
Right.
wasn't that he was not capable, it's that he had never gotten proper instruction.
Yep.
And, once he, got some good instruction, got some opportunities to do research. So I brought him on as one of my research students. He flourished and he was beloved in the engineering department there. And that's, if there's a soapbox that I will stand on, it is that we have to broaden the scope of people that we give research opportunities to because
Totally
there's
agree.
all kinds of people who will find themselves in it who are going to be incredible accomplished researchers who for one reason or another have had something that doesn't make them look good on paper in that moment. And at the end of the
Hmm.
day, an accomplished researcher is one who produces in the lab.
Yep.
It doesn't matter necessarily um, the totality of their educational background. And so this is why I think it's so important that as we think about designing research opportunities that we keep the scope very broad. So part of the reason why my program is so big is that I do not turn students down.
Yes.
I let them self-eliminate out of the program. And
That's
that
us.
means more work for me, but I generally find that if a student isn't a good fit for research, they're going to be bored and frustrated and they're going to leave and that's
Hmm.
fine. Whereas if they are a good fit for research, so I have, so in my program, most of my students who present, so I do take high schoolers to present at professional physics conferences,
Yep.
um, which is unusual. And I'm very selective of who does things like give a talk or who does
Yeah.
things like give a talk outside of the undergraduate section. So right now I have 3 students that I'm preparing right now to give a talk outside of the undergraduate section. And two of them would be students that nobody else would expect because they're only average in the
Hmm.
classroom, but they're exceptional in a lab setting. Now, I've had conversations that they need to be good enough in the classroom if they want
Right.
to go
To get a
further,
little higher.
but and one of them is exceptional everywhere. But had they had I turned them away because they were only average, no one would have ever known how good they were.
Exactly.
And I had another student. Now she is, the confidence she grew in research ended up showing up in her classes as well. Now she's in the process of just taking off. And
Right.
that's something that we as a scientific community, we need to be a lot better about making opportunities for different types of students and giving younger researchers the opportunity to try.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's almost like a parent. You let the kid decide. I love that you're letting them decide, the students, rather than you gatekeeping. I wouldn't say maybe gatekeeping, but just you're deciding for them. You're letting them decide. Hey, you're more than welcome. You're invited. You're welcome. But you will then decide on yourself, not me. And I'm going to be here to support you. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So my next question here is, you kind of briefly touched on. You're building a low cost, optimal tweezing setup for under $4,000, specifically to make research accessible to underfunded institutions. And you're creating an open source database of pollen optics to support climate modeling. Both these projects are designed to share rather than protect. What drives that orientation in a research culture that usually moves right in the opposite direction?
So this is one of my pet projects. So I actually had this idea back when I was at my previous place of employment to build a cost-effective optical tweezer. So optical tweezers, it's a Nobel Prize winning piece of technology. Essentially, to break it down very simply, you send a
Yeah.
laser through a microscope, and then you use optical alignment techniques to basically um, trap and then move around particles, and from there you can
Hmm.
learn about what you've trapped. And there's all kinds of applications for optical tweezing in the field of biophysics. It's also used in quantum computing. Obviously, what we're building is not sophisticated enough to be used in quantum computing, but one of the big issues that larger labs have is that you may have a student who's very gifted in the classroom, but has no optical skills, no
Yeah.
experimental skills. And the thing about working with optics is actually a lot of my students, when they're building optical setups, they'll talk about it feels like Legos. They're actually pretty easy to build. Like
Yeah.
it's a pretty once you start to realize that like light's going to reflect exactly where you expect it to reflect,
Right.
it's it's surprisingly intuitive. And so I think it's a really nice piece of technology to have younger students on because just the amount of natural things that they'll learn, like the thin lens equation, just poured out of the experiment easily. And so what we've done is we've taken there's this incredible research group out of Glasgow, Scotland, um, who have they've called themselves Open Flexure. They've developed 3D printed microscopy tools.
Hmm.
Their whole purpose is to basically lower the access for medical imaging for underdeveloped countries. So I always shout them out because I think what they're doing is incredible.
Yeah, absolutely.
Um,
Uh,
but we took their 3D printed inverted microscope and we modified it to use it for tweezing. So right now we've been trapping with their 3D printed microscope with our modifications. We're using a visible light laser source.
yep.
So when you use a visible light laser source, it actually does eliminate most biophysical measurements because visible light actually will bleach most biomolecules. So, but when I was thinking about different projects we could do, because our whole goal was that we wanted to develop something that not only could you do a demo with, you could actually do research
Hmm.
with, so that we could give this to or give the method to other schools, to other high
Yes.
schools, to smaller colleges like the one I worked at with tiny budgets. So to give you an idea, the liberal arts college I worked at when I first started there, my annual budget was $114.
Wow. Wow.
And that was supposed to pay for all of my labs and research.
Yeah, that's
I I finally got it up to 2,000 before I left, which was still
even then, I mean, damn, 114.
yeah. So, I mean, it did push me to get really creative. But I share that because sometimes I don't think people realize like how tiny the budgets of the smaller schools are.
Wow.
And so my goal in that was not only to develop something that could be like a lab, because a
Yeah,
lab is fine, they're important, but you do it once and then it sits in a box until the next year when you do it again.
exactly.
Whereas if we could develop a measurement that could be made and repeated, that we could actually give them access to research. So the idea I had is you can use optical tweezers to look at the optical properties of bioaerosols like pollen. And so what we're working towards is to use our 3D printed setup to measure the optical
Mhm.
properties of pollen grains, and then we want to write up this method and then publish it and give it to other schools, so that we could create a database of the optics of different pollens. And then,
Mhm.
in this world of AI, you can do more in depth climate modeling. And my thought is that I'm hoping that climate scientists will find this useful, and that they'll have all of these different optical properties of bioaerosols in the atmosphere for climate modeling. And also with climate change, pollen blooms are happening at different times of the year than they used to.
Mhm.
Whenever you have a pollen bloom, it does actually impact the optics of the atmosphere there. So that to me, it's one of my heart projects because I've developed that one for a long time,
That's
and
a
I'm
baby.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
my other projects are awesome too, but that one, kinda has
That's
this I warn the students when they come onto that project, like, "This one has a special place for me."
yeah, it's close
Um,
to the heart. That's
and I think we're obviously, I work with young students, so everything takes a little bit longer. We're probably a few years away from getting to the point where this is really stable and repeatable, but
yeah.
we're getting closer all the time. We're working on our back focal detection system. We're working on getting a stable trap every single time. So to me, it's really exciting, and I really love seeing the students find not just meaning in the physics that they're doing, but realizing that we're doing things for the sake of opening doors for other students. Like
That's
you are here at this incredibly privileged high school. I mean, and some of them are there on scholarships. But recognizing like this is not
this is real
normal,
work.
and
Yeah.
so let's make this more normal. Let's open more doors so that more people can see if this is their path. And also, even if it's not their path and maybe they want to be more of a technician, so that they have the hands-on optical skills, because there are
Experience, yeah.
actually incredible jobs in like being an optical technician, where if you don't have exposure, that wouldn't even be on your radar as something that
Nope.
you can
Yeah,
do.
not at all. Well, that's good. I mean, that's real world experience. You're giving them well, what you guys are creating is a blueprint, right? Like I said, for other um, environments within the pollen and testing it and getting database and feedback and yeah, metrics. So it's really good. So I'm jokingly, hopefully my science folks are still in tune. I'm picking up what you're putting down. For those maybe who lost, hit Google or AI and transcribe her words, and I'm sure you'll figure out what she's talking about. But no, that makes sense to me on what you're doing. I wanna kind of move forward here too, because you talked about your research through private donors, right? You don't have permission to even get traditional grants, which is
Mhm,
good on your part. And you said it gives you freedom, right, to ask
mhm.
bolder questions, less conventional questions. And speaking of that, what kind of questions can you pursue through that model that the grant system would not let you ask? If you have examples.
Um, so when you write a grant, basically you have to ask a question that the people reviewing the grants are going to be interested in. So there
Sure.
is a little bit of gameplay involved with that. So a famous example of kind of how tides can shift, and this does nothing to do with me, but I think it really illustrates the point well. So in the 90s, there was we actually almost had a bigger particle accelerator built in the United States than the LHC, the Large Hadron Collider that's in Switzerland and France.
Hmm.
It was going to be built in Texas, and the government, it was actually the Clinton administration, shut it down. And Bill Clinton said, this
Mm.
past century was the era of physics. This next century is going to be the era of biology. So whatever the political climate was at the time was
Right.
favoring biological research over physical research.
Physics.
And so then the funding went away. Environmental questions can also, there is some contention with environmental questions. Unfortunately, environmental questions have become very political.
Yep.
Because there's a difference between, um, I'm trying to say this the right way. So there's one thing to talk about scientific realities, and it is actually very different than policy making. And
For
unfortunately,
sure.
we've kind of we've confused policy with just scientific realities. And so that's made things in environmental physics more contentious.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, so if I talk
Agreed.
about it, like if you want to talk about the realities, we can talk about that. If you want to talk about the politics, uh, my job has contracted me not to talk about politics. I can't actually talk about that. I can just tell you about the
Yeah.
realities on the ground.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, but and I think that actually gave me more encouragement to lean hard into environmental physics, because from my perspective, it's in my world, because I'm not trying to justify any funding, it's not really contentious. We can
Yeah.
just say, yes, there are heavy metals in our mangroves that have come from the contamination in our groundwater and in our soil from
Mm-hmm.
industrial practices. That's just true.
Right.
You do with that is what you do with that. Um, and so I think that, I've spoken to many of my colleagues who do more environmental research. They're struggling to find funding. So to me, that's an open door
Yeah.
to, like, let's do this. And also, I'm hoping what I can and demonstrate is, like, we don't need to be political about this either. Like, we can just simply present the science and recognize
Right.
that it is actually different than policy. Policy is about people and how you're going to organize them. Science is about the results.
Exactly. And I think the prior is more important, in my opinion. It's like, let's just go to the real data. What's
Yeah.
real? What holds up? Let's not dress it up with any other theoretical politics or what have you on top of it. So yeah, yeah, I totally agree there. And actually, my next, I have a just more of an internal question, but like, has there any been a question that you've been able to ask that you would have been able to ask prior? Like, is there something like throughout your experience that you've asked, like, hey, I wouldn't have been able to ask this prior because of traditional grading. And
Uh,
maybe it's the one you just mentioned about, the metals
I
in
mean,
the
that's
ground.
definitely one, like, I can go after that. I don't think I mean, there's definitely people who do a lot of mangrove research. Some of the things that we're doing, I think we would have difficulty getting funding for.
Mhm.
Um, we're doing a huge structural study of looking at exactly how the plant responds to different stressors.
Yeah.
Um, and it is a question that, like, I'm not entirely sure what if we're gonna find anything that's super meaningful other than just a proof of concept. But, um, I don't again, it doesn't matter. Like, if we're learning something new, the students are thriving and succeeding, we're contributing to the broader knowledge of, the scientific community. So I think things like that. Recently, I've started a new project where I've been, having students develop, based on a conversation with a colleague at the University of, Missouri, where we've been growing plants in a transparent soil media. Those are things
Mm.
that I never like. The ability to do, like, such a wide variety of research
Yeah, the
would
rain.
not be available to me if I was on a traditional grant cycle. And it is possible because of the type of program I'm in. And as a curious person, I kind of like that I'm,
Yeah,
doing transparent soil and studying mangroves in depth and doing optical tweezing and doing laser induced breakdown spectroscopy and
you can dabble.
doing baited remote underwater video for biodiversity. It's really fun. And I feel like I get to be this perpetual student with my students,
Mhm.
and I
Yeah,
like
you're
to make
learning.
it full for them. It's like, I don't know everything. Like, you are teaching me how to do field work, because I know how to be in physics labs, but to be out waiting in the mud and looking at
Yeah.
fish is all new to me. So you have to teach me and let me show you, let me model for you what it's like to learn something new, even though you have a PhD. Like the
Yep.
learning doesn't stop. And I am not, so full of my education that I can't admit to you that there are a lot of things that I don't know. And I can
Yes.
model for you what it's like to ask questions.
Yeah, I love that too because I think that's important. That's important to really, especially in the you get higher education, academia. I feel like that once again, I think you can test to people do get full of their ego or their past degrees of what they've
Mhm.
studied, but things change, right? And two, education never stops, right?
Nope.
It's a forever um, journey of just learning of new things. So yeah, I love that you say, "Hey, I have a PhD, but I'm still learning," and the kids are learning, and you're learning with them. So it's a journey together as you're moving forward. And speaking of your kids, I want to actually move there. That's where I want to kind of move next.
Mhm.
Next is, and you kind of briefly touched on it prior, but really just building scientists who were not expected to become scientists. We kind of talked about in the beginning, but you grew kind of this high school research program from 3 students to over 50, which kudos to you. So we're going to give you your flowers. With 30 presenting at global physics summits, what did you see in the students early on that made you believe high schoolers could do real, right, conference level physics research when most institutions were not even trying, or right, like you said earlier, discouraging or even believing in them?
So a lot again, I have to go back to my time at IU South Bend.
Yeah,
So IU South Bend is a what's known as a primarily undergraduate institution. So that means all the research labs are mostly staffed by undergraduates. I do know faculty there occasionally get a postdoc.
yeah,
And so my first exposure to a research lab was a research lab of basically a technician, a PI who wasn't there that often, and then a bunch of undergraduate students. And um, I looked at what we were able to produce. We were so we at the time the collaboration that I was doing work for, we were doing work for collaborations called Coup and Picasso. They've since combined to form Pico, which is a new dark matter collaboration, but we produced all the acoustic transducers that went on the dark matter detectors. And they
mm,
were always surprised at the quality of transducers that were being produced by this lab of basically undergraduate students. And
yeah,
so that experience really stuck with me in terms of the ability of younger researchers. So when I say younger researchers, I simply just mean new to the field. Now I'm
yeah,
working with literal younger researchers, but um it was, I had that in mind when I built my undergraduate research group. And I think that I really developed a soft spot for introducing students to doing research. And my first year there, I wasn't entirely sure what high
hmm,
school students could do. I was just uh, maybe because I'm the type of person who quits jobs to go back to school to to do physics, I was willing to take a chance to see what would happen. So the first year was a lot of learning. I made a whole bunch of mistakes.
yep,
And But the students, they did pretty good work. The second year is really where things began to explode. So it was that year I found my footing. I started to really learn the technology. And also the other thing is when I came here, there was this laser induced spectroscopy setup that I knew nothing about, and they had no documentation, and I had to learn it all. And by the
oh
second year, I
geez,
started to know more about it. So you can actually
yeah,
use it more effectively. Um, and so then I really started to figure out how to break projects down. So I think the big mistake that a lot of people make when they're working with younger students is they're thinking big picture. So
hmm,
they're thinking about 5 years out. The thing is, you're not going to have those students for 5 years. So you need to think, I have a
yeah,
5 year plan, but what can I do to give this student a 1 year vision that they can accomplish?
yep,
And so that's what I started to do with my students. It started my first year, but like I said, I made a lot of mistakes. My second year, it was like, okay, so we're going to do laser induced breakdown spectroscopy. I want your only focus to be on developing a sample that can withstand laser pressure. And this is successful. If you achieve this, we'll be able to do a lot of things. And this in itself is a meaningful project to do. So I started thinking in terms of like undergraduate research experience for undergraduates. So that's where undergraduate students go for a summer. and they
Yep.
do something. So faculty have to think of a project that can be done in about 10 weeks.
Yeah.
And so the idea of like 10 weeks of full-time work basically is about what a high school student can do in 2 years part-time,
Yeah.
um, give or take, or what many students can do in 1 year. So that was the other thing is no student works alone. So in a typical physics lab, some of these projects, just one student would get it. I never give just one student a project. I always give them someone to work
Mhm.
with. Also, in part because um, I am out of all the students we have in my program, I supervise most of them as their primary supervisor. So I can only split
Yeah.
myself so many ways from Sundays. So they do
Yeah.
actually have to have each other
Yeah,
uh,
yeah, exactly.
waiting for me to come around and answer their questions. And so that's really, what I did was just thinking about what was my long-term vision. I would share that with them to give them some deeper motivation, but I really work to focus them on the immediate goal because
Mhm,
it
mhm.
can be really frustrating if you're given a project that you can't accomplish. You're going to start to feel like you're not good enough, and that's not what
Yeah.
you are good enough. There are lots of things that need to be done, and when I really started, whenever I get a new student, we work a lot on sort of the timeline. And the main thing I'm doing for the first 4 months or so is like, well, that's an amazingly ambitious goal. You need to pull it back.
Yeah, yeah,
I'm not saying you can't do it. I'm just saying that you are here for 1 hour once a week
exactly. That's
and you are
yeah.
proposing something that would need to be done full time for 4 months, which you don't have.
Yeah, exactly. Let's bring it back down just a little bit. Yeah.
um,
And not to interject, but I think it's important too. You're kind of saying it here, but like you're compartmentalizing, keeping the things real. Like, what's reality? I can give you this broad vision of what we're going or what I'd like to get to, but let's give you something that's applicable today. Let's figure this out now. And these are building blocks, right?
mhm.
These are the things that are going to help you get to where the bigger vision is or where you may go do in your future. But um, doing the little things helps, and it gives once again it gives the maybe conviction or like reassurance, like, oh, okay, I can do this. I'm not dumb. I'm not I can't. I'm not smart enough. You're giving those wins once again, those little small wins.
Right, right. Well, and the other thing that I emphasize is like if we want to ask big questions, they're answered over years, not months. And
Yeah.
so, this is actually the way physics research works is most of the time you come in the middle of a project and you leave before it's done. So, this
Mhm.
is, embracing them in that reality of yes, other students are going to finish what you started, but when you go to graduate school, the same thing's going to be true. So it's also teaching them what science research actually looks and feels like.
Yeah, yeah, that's important.
And I think grounding them in that, it's like, do you want to ask big questions or do you want to ask like science fair questions? If you want to ask science fair questions, then you can do this in a year. If you want to ask really big questions, then you're going to do a part of a project, but then you get to be a part of the legacy of that project.
Yep. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, that's a good way to frame it. So you said that most physics progress, right? Or progress comes from students or superstars, but from competent, curious researchers.
Hmm.
Um, and you've built kind of your program specifically to serve students who may not see every test, or excuse me, may not ace every test, but light up in research setting, right?
Hmm.
What do you see, I guess, happen in a student when they are finally given access to that kind of environment?
Um, I mean, I see a lot of confidence develop in them.
Yeah, yeah,
We have one in particular. She just graduated this year. But she, when I first had her in my physics class, she was, I mean, she was average. I liked her, but she was
yeah,
average.
yeah.
Um, and to see her in a lab, it took a little bit for her to get going, but she really enjoyed the questions. I think every once in a while, I mean, I have had researchers who are very gifted in the classroom,
For sure.
as well, but, I think sometimes I find with the students who are less gifted, like, the they've had to come back from bad tests, so coming back from a disappointing result in the lab in some ways is, doesn't bring them down as much, which can be
Oh,
really
that's
nice,
good.
but I really watched her just become more confident. She stood up straighter, she spoke with a lot
Mhm.
more determination. I think at least her parents have told me this, in part her time doing research is the reason why she is now, going into a STEM degree, is that, she realized that she was good at it, that she's
Yeah.
competent. She is very good at it. She's a very gifted researcher. She asks really good questions. She's methodical in the way that she approaches them. She I mean, she takes risks, but she takes careful risks.
Hmm.
And so that's really, when I am looking at a student who's going to be a good researcher, they're very curious. They take careful risks. They can be taught. So
Yeah.
they have enough confidence to try, but enough humility to learn.
That's a good way to put it. Yeah. Yeah, it is.
And so that's really, when I see that in a student, regardless of how they're doing in the classroom, I know that
Yeah.
that's someone who has what it takes to be a good researcher.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I'm gonna ask you a question. You kind of already answered it because when you gave your kind of whole story, you were answering it. But I'm gonna give you another time if you want to answer it. If you want to condense your answer, it's totally fine. But you talked about right navigating imposter syndrome. I think we all deal with that, myself included. Um, and including at a moment you spoke about at a conference where an MIT professor kind of told you it never goes away, as you said earlier. What did like
Mhm.
hearing that from someone at that level do for you? And how do you now use that your own experience with self doubt to mentor your students in your own program?
So hearing that, it honestly made me breathe a sigh of relief. Because you can feel a lot of shame that,
Hmm.
you're seeing yourself be successful and yet you still struggle with feeling like you belong there. And I think this goes in journeys in some ways. The nightmare that I've heard from many PhDs, like PhDs, once they actually have their PhD, like you have a recurring nightmare for about 3 or 4 years afterwards that you're still working on your dissertation and that it's all gone away.
That's funny.
And I think getting further away from that can make you a little bit more secure in yourself. But what I learned is that I had to really think about where I was going to allocate my energy.
Yeah.
Did I want to allocate my energy towards fighting it, and was that a fight I could win, or did I want my to allocate my energy to sort of dealing with it? And I think some of this, like energy allocation, a lot of those techniques actually probably come more. So I'm an endurance athlete. I do long distance running and long distance cycling.
Oof.
And, that's all about managing your mental and emotional state. And you have to think, like, is this emotion going to go towards pushing me forward or is it going to take away? So one of the things I think about, like, if I get frustrated on a run, I have to let the frustration go because it's going to take energy
Yep.
away from me that I need to use to keep
Literally. Yeah.
going. Literally.
Yeah. We can track it.
Um,
We can track it even from our thoughts.
and so, thinking about my own imposter syndrome, I realized that fighting it was taking a lot of energy away and I wasn't really winning that fight. And so instead of feeling embarrassed or ashamed about it, it was like, all right, this is just, I
Hmm.
have this because I care and because it's important to me. And so instead of spending all this energy fighting it, instead, I'm going to allocate this energy towards just acknowledging that it's there and that
Hmm.
it's normal, but not letting it keep me from what I'm doing.
Yeah.
And to me, I found that to be a far more efficient way of dealing with my energy. And that's something I talk about with my students, particularly students I have that are other women or minorities. It's like, you may like feeling this is normal. It's not something you should be ashamed of. It means you care. And so what you're going to have to learn is what you want to do with this. Do you want to put it, if you can't silence it, instead of wasting all this energy trying to silence it, maybe it's just like, well, this just goes
Hmm.
in the corner. Like this is my laundry chair and it's just there.
Yeah. Yeah. You got
And
it.
I'm gonna deal with it, and I need to schedule this time for my emotions, and then I'm gonna ride the wave and let it go. And I think that normalizing that idea that it's okay to doubt yourself. It doesn't mean you're a bad physicist. It just means that, it means you care. It's probably a part of your personality.
Yeah. You're human.
And so that's, because it was so good for me to hear that, I really try um, to share that with my students. Is also part of why, one of my codes of conduct in my lab is how we treat each other. I am not interested
Mhm.
in working with any students who are going to put down their peers.
Yes.
This is not a competition. I actually have a really strict authorship policy to utterly discourage competition among the students because I don't care who's the best. I care that the task gets done. And the task
Exactly.
is going to get done better if we all work together than if one person tries to do it by themselves.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. I agree. Like I said, I think it's important to acknowledge, right? Because if not, you create the anxiety and the imposter syndrome. It's just a whole vicious cycle. If you don't acknowledge it, like you said, can maybe compartmentalize it a little bit, but be aware of it and not let it bog you down. Um, I think it's also interesting too. Before I go to our advertisement here, our ad in the shows, I think for all of us, even myself, it's like you're going to run into challenges, even with physics, like you said, you're going to run into constraints. You're going to run into things that show up and tell you, oh, that's not the truth. That's not reality. Go back and change maybe equation or formula. So I think it's hard because we're human. We want to have this like least resistance path, but it may be even just a reframing of like you're going to have challenges, and that's okay. Like that is normal in the process, as much
And
as we
and I,
don't want to do it.
I would actually add to that, and then this does go back to my research for my master's thesis. We have this idea that scientists just know everything right away and they're immediately good at it. That's just not true.
No.
We're wrong all the time in science. We all have to work at stuff. We're only experts in these tiny little like microcosms of a field. And but that's not what you see in how science
Mhm.
is depicted in television shows, how they're depicted in movies. If you think about like the CSI show, the
Yeah.
number of things that those scientists knew was utterly unrealistic. And if you think that that's what you need to be like, um, I mean, I've met maybe 1 or 2 that are like that, but, they have IQs that are just off the you know, like I said, I go to physics conferences and I've met 1 or 2 people who are like that.
Yeah, very,
That's
very, very rare.
They're very
Yeah,
rare, they're very unusual, they have other stuff that they're bad at,
yep.
and so I think some of it is just realizing that, um, scientists are a lot more normal than, than what you think they are, and that you having to learn something or doubting yourself is normal because science, at the end of the day, is a human thing, and humans are insecure and imperfect and have to learn
Mhm.
things.
Yes, yes, absolutely. Alright, so before we move forward, I wanna take a quick moment, really, to kinda give a quick shout out to our community partner here actually in South Bend, because, if we're talking about, building spaces where people can actually grow and discover what they're capable of, we have to look at the tools that are actually in our backyard. So, well, real quick, or anything really, anyone who's local here in South Bend, if you haven't looked at St. Joe County Public Library's event calendar lately, you should. They got a lot more than people realize. They got story times, workshops, author talks, hands-on activities for kids, teen events, book clubs, and free resources for adults. It's one of those things where there's probably more or something useful happening near you. You just haven't checked yet. So you can see what's coming up at sjcpl.org backslash events. And that's St. Joe County Public Library.org backslash events. So definitely check them out. I'm a big reader myself. You can see Emily behind her. She's got plenty of books, and definitely take advantage of them because we support them and we appreciate them as well to be a community partner on the show. Quick pause. If what Emily is doing with students in her research program resonates and you want to support science equity work, reach out through her public channels. Link is in the show notes. Mention code LifeIsPod10 and connect with the work. This is the kind of access that changes what is possible for the next generation. All right, so I want to get back to kind of your next segment, which is really kind of the faith, the science, and the courage to hold both. This is really interesting too, because I'm excited to get into this part as you balance both and face these some challenges here. So you've done some deep research, right, on the relationship between science and faith, and you encourage students to examine how their worldview shapes their interpretation of data.
Mhm.
So most people in science would rather not touch that conversation. What made you willing to go there and dive into that field?
So first of all, I need to explain. So So I have been a person of faith basically my entire life.
Hmm.
My parents are missionaries. I grew up in the mission field. Um, I went to a Christian college, actually another one in the South Bend area. I'm a Bethel University alum.
Yep.
Um, and um, and I know some people would hear that and think, well, you were raised in a family of faith. You made these choices that you were just, you just accepted. That's actually not true at all. Like at
Right.
some point, it was really in 13 when I was 13 that my faith really became my own. So I did things like go to youth group, go to church intentionally in high school. In fact, I didn't even go to the same church that my parents were
Yeah.
working at.
Yeah.
um, and and as someone that has I don't go too much into it at this point unless you want to follow up, but just I did mention about my parents' divorce and and coming out with my dad's double life. That I mean, that really was a turning moment for me where
Hmm.
when you have somebody who's been a pastor, who's been a missionary, and they're very flawed, you have to reconcile with is God real?
Yeah.
A lot of people would say, well, I was hurt by somebody who was of faith, therefore God isn't real. And
Right.
my thought was like, well, if God has always used flawed people. If you've read the Bible, you have Eli, whose sons absolutely, he was a person of faith, but he didn't raise his sons correctly, and yet that's who God used. You have Samson, who was an
Correct.
absolute disaster. You have Methuselah, who didn't embrace God until he was, in a prison camp. So there's or not Methuselah. I forget his name. One of the kings. Um,
We'll fact check it later. Someone will know.
it's Second Kings, I think it is.
Yeah.
It's not. It begins with an M, but it's not Methuselah. Methuselah was the oldest living person in the Bible. So you can see that God has always used really flawed people, from Abraham to Moses, people who've done terrible things, and yet God has always been bigger than them. And so I think that, coming to that realization when the person who was your pastor and also your father, which is has, you know, has been so flawed. Um, Either God is bigger than the people he chooses or he's not. And if he's not, it's not worth following. And
Hmm.
so I realized then that God is far bigger
Yeah.
than all of that. I think that in a lot of ways that's where my faith got a lot sturdier because it was put to a real test.
For sure.
And where I got more into science and faith really came out of when I was at my graduate program. So I was um, so physics is a very secular field. A lot of physicists are non-religious or atheistic. And in the United Kingdom, which is where I got my PhD, that's even more true. So the United Kingdom is a post-Christian country. The majority of the population there would identify as non-religious. And then when you get into physics, um, I was actually in a study where they were looking at religiosity among physicists, and only 10%
Wow.
were religious, and that would include everything from Hinduism to Islam to Christianity.
Damn.
Um,
Yeah.
and so when I was looking around my department and realizing that I was one of 4 people that I knew of that was actually serious about their faith, I knew that I needed to really understand things at a deeper level. I mean, I knew I'd experienced God, but when you're talking to people who have a naturalistic philosophy, so this would be a philosophy based purely in empiricism, that they were going to demand deeper reasons. And so that's when I started taking seriously the study of apologetics, listening to their questions, and really, understanding scripture deeply, understanding um, different scientific arguments, the perspective that people bring to how they understand science, and where I found value in that. Christians in fields like physics and other sciences, we have an
Sure.
obligation um, to take seriously the questions that are being leveraged at
Hmm.
us, and to understand what it means to have something to have faith and to hold both the belief in the supernatural along with practicing in a field that really focuses on the natural. And then from there, so the 2 colleges I worked at, So now I'm at an entirely secular school, so I can't do this at the same level that I used to. But they were both faith-based institutions, and I really felt like it was important that I give my students the same opportunity to really understand their own perspective. Because in the
Yeah.
process of doing this, you think about, I think a lot of people often phrase these questions really, um, I don't know, say inappropriate isn't the word I want, but I can't come up with a better word right now, where they're thinking, well, is it compatible? Are they in conflict?
Yeah. Yeah.
That's not
Yeah.
really the right question. The question is, what is your perspective? How does your perspective influence the way that you look at the world and the way you interpret data? Because everybody has a perspective
For
and
sure.
all of it gets brought to the table in the way that you interpret data. And that's really clear in science. Um, there are questions you will ask if you believe in the supernatural, and there are questions you won't ask if you don't
Mhm.
believe in the supernatural. And that means you're going to be closed to things that really challenge your worldview. And so, for me, I really wanted students to understand their own worldview and to understand the worldviews of others. And when I would introduce this assignment, I would always tell them, is like, there are people who are good and moral and intelligent who have read the same data that you have and have a completely different perspective.
Yep.
Why?
Yeah.
And you can't tell me that they've been indoctrinated or that they're stupid, because that's not true.
Right. That's a lazy answer.
That's a lazy answer.
Yeah.
Um, and that's where I would start. And I would expose them to different, obviously we're very familiar with the areas where there's a lot of contention between having a Judeo-Christian perspective with some of the scientific theories, but I also expose them, the same thing happens within atheism.
Yep.
Classic example is, of course, the Big Bang Theory. I always shock my students, and I still shock them even at secular school. I'm like, do you know who proposed the theory? Like, no, it was like, whatever. I'm like, it was a Belgian Catholic priest.
Mhm.
And part of the reason he proposed the Big Bang Theory is that he had no issue with the universe having a beginning. And that was very problematic to the atheistic physicists of the day, because a universe without a beginning poses no problem to the question of God. If the universe has a beginning, now it's gotten theologically complicated, and that's really inconvenient.
Yes, it is.
Um,
Yeah. Yeah. Changes everything.
so Exactly, exactly. And so, so that was, we would talk about that, and then it was also just be aware of someone's worldview when you're reading their material, because what you'll often find, especially in popular science books, regardless of what perspective it's being written from, is they'll say something scientific, and the next paragraph is a worldview paragraph. But if you're not
Mhm.
sensitive to that, you could just go along with them. And so that's what I tried to help them
Very
be
much true.
aware of. Doesn't mean they're wrong. It just means you need to be aware of what is an empirical argument and what is something that would be a little bit more of a philosophical argument or a theological argument.
Yep.
And what are the limitations of different worldviews? Like the naturalistic philosophy, it has its limitations. So where does it start to break apart? And then the other thing that,
Yeah.
where I really changed in this process is, so a lot of my students, I've had students who were atheist, science students who were, young earth, more fundamentalist types, and everything in between. And in the process of starting this project, I realized, so among many scientists who are Christians, there can be a special animosity towards other people of faith who hold young earth perspectives.
Mm.
And it's not really fair. So I am not a young earth creationist. I always state that first, but I realized that just because I disagreed with them didn't mean that they didn't get to go on the same journey that I went
Right.
on. And in the process of really understanding their perspective and then working to help them be seen as valuable individuals within the field who were welcome there, it changed the way I saw different people from different backgrounds. And I often joke, like, I never expected to be the person advocating for young earth creationists to be in a science class, but here I am advocating for young earth creationists, that they should have the same opportunity to study science as anybody else, and they should have the same opportunity to understand the history of their perspective, what it's grounded in,
Mhm.
and we shouldn't simply quiet them just because
Yeah,
We
censored.
don't agree with them. And
Yeah.
anyone is capable of being dogmatic. That
Yeah,
is not
yeah.
unique to someone who would hold a traditionally religious view. And so that's been something that I've really worked in my classes, is to really emphasize that I'm serious when I say that all perspectives are welcome here. I really want students to go on this intellectual journey. And if I immediately shut down a perspective, they're either not going to talk about it again, or they're never going to challenge their own belief system. I got stronger in my faith and my understanding
Yes.
of the universe because I allowed it to be challenged. I researched deeply, what is the history between, like, oh, speaking of younger perspectives, since I'm on that, like, I know that this came out in the 1600s because somebody went through the genealogy, and that's really where that came from. I also know that, I know about obviously the Big Bang, which I talked about. I know that atheism came up in science in the 1820s, and really understanding,
The
you know,
origin.
looking at the works of Thomas Aquinas and how he thought about the universe, and understanding, even how Grecian influence came into how we understand the universe, and how some of the things that they thought came from the church actually came from Greece. This is all part of the journey that we need to go on. When we go on that, we're going to learn more about our history, more about the philosophies we come out of, and it's going to challenge our own perspectives. And then when we come out of that, we can say, yes, these are the things I believe. I understand where they're dissonant with the present culture.
Mhm.
Here's the evidence that I have for what I believe. Here's things that maybe I don't have every evidence I would like, but if you are going to get me to move from this belief, here's what I need to see from you.
Yes.
And
Love
that's
that.
something that I think all students deserve the right to go on. And I think that if we want to have a more inclusive scientific community, we need to be far more welcoming to people who are coming from all different perspectives and all different views of the world. Um, because they may have something to contribute to the field of science, even if they have a different perspective on how the world came to be.
Yeah. You said so much in there. I was like, man, there's so many parts I just wanted to maybe pop in. But
Sorry,
no,
this
you
is
did.
something I
I
can
mean,
really soapbox on.
it was a great answer because there was so much just value. I think there's so much wisdom in what you said. Yeah, like there's 4 ways to get downtown. We should be inclusive to allow other perspectives. It makes you sharper. And that is science, right? That is physics of like you're getting critiques, you're getting your whole, your evidence, whatever it is, you're getting holes poked through, and how do I make it stronger? And that naturally builds each other up. So yeah, there were so many great themes you said. I lost probably half of them as you were going, but that's all. That's what I remember at the moment of just like having the ideology of like, yeah, like we want to invite other people. Don't discourage them. Don't censor them out. Don't put red tape. They have value. They bring great perspective, and I do too. And we can challenge each other in a healthy way.
Mhm,
You also use a phrase side by side when actually speaking to this, right? Describe how you use or hold science and faith, not unified or not in conflict, belong each other. What does that maybe actually mean to you, and why do you think it is more honest? It is more honest position than forcing them together or putting them in opposition.
yeah, so that's a really good question, and there are different perspectives on this. And I would have said probably, gosh, I'm older than I think I am. About 7 or 8 years ago, I would have said, "Oh, they're in unity," and it really, in the process of doing deeper studies, I came more out with the side by side
Yeah,
perspective. There's 4 main kind of, I forget who came up with the scholar that came up
analogy.
with, like, the 4 main perspectives, but, like, one is in conflict, one is in unity, one is side by side, and I forget the 4th one.
Right.
And the side by side really came out of realizing that right now the way we do science is from a more naturalistic perspective, so there really isn't any room for the supernatural.
Yeah.
But yet I still affirm the existence of the supernatural, and I would affirm the existence of things that are outside of what can be empirically tested. I think most people do.
Yeah.
Something like
Agree.
justice or truth or beauty, these are not empirical things, and yet most people would agree that these exist, even though they're not scientifically testable. And so uh, I found that by, for me, trying to put them together, it was creating more dissonance
Hmm.
I think that in fact, actually, I started to get frustrated with a lot of the science and faith conversations because I felt like unnatural questions were being asked. I think if we think about the fact that in some ways empirical reasoning really isn't that old. It's really only going back a couple hundred years. So if you think about
Right.
it, it kind of makes sense that we're not at a point where we can really bring these two things together. And so I I
Yeah.
treat I think the way I would treat it, and I'm going to make a totally nerdy example here, and I understand it's probably not a one-to-one mapping, but I think about quantum mechanics and general relativity. These are two theories that have been very
Hmm.
well proven and yet do not entirely play well together because we're missing some knowledge to really understand
Yeah.
how to put them together. And that's how I would view fusing how we do natural exploration with supernatural understanding is that we just don't have enough knowledge at this point to bring them together. And I don't want to forcibly bring two things together where we just don't know enough. And, I always tell my students, like, I'm actually a very skeptical person. So I'm very cautious in the things that I say to the point where I can sound really pedantic in class because I'm very
Yeah.
careful
Yeah.
when I answer questions. It's like, well, is this the smallest particle? And they'd be like, well, as far as we know,
Exactly. It's for,
there's a
yeah.
possibility.
Yep.
Like, let me get into the quark structure. I know this is just like the intro physics class, but now I have to make sure that I'm being careful. Um, so that's really, where I fell down into, I think because it gave me the most intellectual freedom.
Hmm.
Um, and um, and also I think it gives me room to really explore both apologetical arguments for my faith as well as understanding science at a deeper level without being worried at this point about how they intersect. Because, I mean, as a person of faith, I of course think the intersection's there, but I can also rest assured, just like I do with, um, understanding the natural world and the things that we don't understand, like dark matter, that
Yeah. Yeah.
I think we're going to get there. We just don't know enough right now. And that's kind of how I think about it. It's like, we're going to get there, but I mean, physics in a lot of ways, it's like I joke with my students, we do modern physics, we finally got you to the 1910s.
Hmm. Yeah.
Which
Literally.
really, I mean, the scope of knowledge really isn't that long ago.
Yeah. No, you're
Um, you
right.
know,
You're not.
yeah, I mean, the electron was discovered in 1896. That really isn't that long ago. And so I think just like, I said earlier, a little humility I think goes a long way.
For sure.
Um, in
Yeah.
terms of recognizing that, we don't know everything right now. We probably won't know we'll know more in 100 years, but probably not as much as we would like.
Yeah.
And so, it's okay to kind of rest on this is of course the controversial thing about being a religious person is I would hold to some things that are absolutely true, but I can rest on that while still believing that, you know, the scientific world can still open up new questions. And I think to go on a slight tangent, the
You're
question
fine.
I would ask my students is, does the universe make sense with a loving and order God? Like that's the biggest existence or evidence for existence right there. If you believe that the universe
Hmm.
shows evidence of a ordered and loving God, which I believe it does. But that's kind of how you have to think about it, and then from there recognize that we still have so much more to learn, both scientifically as well as theologically.
Yeah. That's a good way to put it. You really summed it up. Like, we just don't know enough. And it's funny because you said something earlier, and I was thinking the same thing. Like, to what we know, that's only possible. That's what we know right now. But, metaphorically or metaphysically, doesn't mean it's not testable. We couldn't do it, but here's where we're at. And like you said, we just don't know at this point, and it's going to take time. Other great people to probe different questions to get there. So, great, great, great answer there. You actually answered my next question, so I'm going to actually skip that because you actually already answered it. You wrapped it up on one, but I do want to move kind of as we get to this back half here. I know we've been on here for a while, but on the back half, kind of more just your resilience, and just what you built from where you came from and what you've been doing, kind of your personal journey. You talked about growing up moving constantly, right? A childhood marked by instability and a persistent sense of kind of rootlessness, if you will.
Mhm.
What did that kind of early experience do to your relationship with belonging, and how do you see it connecting to the work you now do with your students who may feel like they do not belong in science?
It's a good question. So, I don't think I talked about this on this podcast. I'll just kind of recap in case.
Yeah, it's
I,
fine.
I did mention I grew up in the mission field. I grew up in Spain. My childhood was back and forth across the ocean. Talked about moving in the middle of high school. So I just, for perspective, I've lived in 4 different countries and 9 states. When I was
Yeah.
36, I had moved 32 times.
Which is
I'm
wild.
now older than 36 and I've moved more since then. In terms of my sense of belonging is very fractured. I still to this day struggle with small talk because a lot of the common questions I'm terrible at answering. It's like, where are you
Yeah.
from? I don't know.
I know, right?
It's like all over.
Yeah.
And then you throw in the fact, what do you do? I'm like, well, I'm a physicist.
Yeah.
It's just terrible. It doesn't go well. um, but
Yeah.
uh, but I think what that experience has done for me is that I've been an outsider for most of my life. I would still consider myself very much an outsider. Like I don't have a huge cultural identity. I don't have any. I've talked about not having a sense of where I'm from, but it does help me relate to other people
Very
who
much.
feel like they're outside, and who come from different perspectives, who are struggling with their own sense of belonging and fitting in, and what it's like to go through different transitions. It's definitely, when I've worked with students, like, so last year I had 2 students who moved right before, both started in my classroom, they had moved right before their junior year,
Yep.
one of whom from across the country, the other one was a third culture kid, so I found that, often I just have a little bit more understanding to give
Yeah, yeah.
to third culture kids. I think, the fact that my life has been so transient and so unstable has enabled me to make big risk. When you're not really risking stability because you don't have stability, it's easier to take a chance.
It's a good way to
I mean,
put it.
there's
Yeah.
consequences to that as well. But but that's kind of how I've used it. I've recognized it really has marked a lot of things about my personality, and it's probably part of the reason I'm a little eccentric. But on the other hand, it has opened up relationships and friendships that I would have otherwise never had. I still am very close to people that I grew up with on the mission field. I have dear friends who live
Hmm.
in England. I have dear friends who are all over the United States. I know how to maintain long distance friendships, which is kind of cool. That I've had the same friends for going on multiple decades, where we live in totally different places, but we're
Still
still very
connected.
dedicated
Yeah.
to maintaining our relationship.
Yeah. I mean, there's a good part of like adaptability on your part. Like I wouldn't, I know when we spoke offline, it can maybe seem like I won't say doom and gloom, like the instability, which all kids, I think as adults now, we're in adulthood. So of course, as a child, you look back, you wish there was more stability, but there's pros there. I mean, there's pros even for, even me, myself, as I kind of related, like single mother, kind of street smart, kind of just, I can pivot. I can, like, you put it right, you can take more risk. I'm okay taking more risk because I
Mhm.
really didn't have stability. Um, so I think there's pros there. Of course, there's blind spots and efficiencies, but I definitely want to highlight to your story as someone listening, there are pros if those who are tuning in to relate. There's good things you can do, and you can relate to your students, as you mentioned, or other people going through that transition that are not so familiar with it. Yeah. All right, so you navigated divorce and family instability, which we just talked about, alongside a career that demanded sustained intellectual ambition in some of the most demanding academic environments there are. How did you like hold all of that together, like the personal and the professional, without collapsing the other?
Uh, I'm not entirely sure I always succeed at that. So I think in terms of, so to think about how I've maintained, my personal life with my professional life. So my current husband, we actually reconnected when I was getting ready to go to a PhD program, and he early into our we kind of like each other but we're not talking to it conversations. I
Right.
found out about being accepted to Royal Holloway
Yeah.
in London. At the time, I was living in Nebraska. He was living in Portland, so we were already long distance, and yeah, we were about to be ultra long distance. And he made a very conscious decision that he wanted to pursue me, even though it would mean moving to a different country and making sacrifice. And I think um, there was
Yeah.
something very clarifying about that in terms of that relational importance. And
Yeah.
um, for me to have the privilege of being in a PhD program, which was very difficult and demanding, and then to have somebody by my side who saw me,
Yeah. Yeah.
and so and my just so my husband is not a scientist; he's an artist. He's brilliant and creative in his own way, but we are in very different fields, and then to have him value me for more than just what I was doing, I think really was very grounding.
Mm.
And it helped, in the darkest days, like one of the things that I sometimes talk about, even with my students, and like the thing is, like I've done I've made a lot of sacrifices for my career. I like a lot of things about it, but I know that when I'm on my deathbed, my career is not going to be there for me. But my family is going to be there for me, and
Yeah.
that that is what's important. Um, and And I think as I got older and thinking about, the directions I wanted to take, I did want to be interested in what I was doing, but I also wanted to have a thriving and whole life. Um,
Yeah.
and I think I had my first child as a graduate student, and that really changes you when you're having to balance, this demanding uh academic program with, this
Motherhood.
infant.
Yeah.
Um, and it shifted my priorities. It's also part of the reason some of my colleagues now are like, "How do you do all these things?" I'm like, "Well, I was a mom as a grad student, so I've learned how to compartmentalize my time because
Yeah.
I
Yeah. Yes.
and so I think that, always thinking about the fact of what's truly, what is interesting in life and what's actually important in life. Like my career is very interesting. I mean, it is important to me, but it's not on the same deep level that my husband and my children are to me.
Correct.
And I think that, on my good days, I remember that, and why I do what I do. And I remember that, my husband is a huge reason why I've gotten through the really hard days in my career is because I've had somebody who has been in my corner rooting for me,
Mhm.
who believes in me, even when I don't believe in myself, even when it feels like the people
Yeah.
around me don't believe in me. And that makes a huge difference, and it's part of the reason why, even though it can be sometimes controversial as a woman in physics to talk about the importance of family, the importance of your children, but I have said that to many of my students. It's like, if you have a good family, if you get married, if you choose to get married, you choose to have kids, though they are more important
Yeah.
than
That's
you're
true.
taught in physics, and it will give you deeper and longer lasting meaning, and it will in turn pay you back, and that your career becomes more than just about you. And I well, and
Yeah.
as I said before, I'm a Christian. We live for more than ourselves,
Mhm.
and I think family is a good way to practice that.
Yeah. I wanna give a shout I mean, shout out to your husband. I think, when you have someone to, like you said, be that support, that frame of support, see you unconditionally, right? Like you said, strip away the academics and physics, like, just you as a human being, right? I
Mhm.
think any human at a simple level wants that, yearns for that, right? And to
Mhm.
have that from a companion, to have that support is like ultra important and ultra um, valuable. So definitely shout out to him and shout out to all the mothers, yourself included, because honestly, you're the ones who still have to go back to work with a kid, right?
Mhm.
And I think there's a lot of you touched on it earlier, beginning of the podcast. Schools, even cities don't have the infrastructure to support growing families, growing women who have kids in other careers, right? They just expect you to like pop up a kid and just get back to work. So shout out to you to even do a PhD while having a kid. I have a few other guests in the same boat,
Mhm.
so they're listening before they come on. I want to at least show you guys your flowers as well on that because it is difficult. And I think it's unsung heroes in a sense that people are just like, oh yeah, whatever, like women can do that, but it's not. They don't understand the magnitude and gravity of what you have to go through. The the quiet, stressful nights, days that just
Mhm.
get warped and ate up through societal norms, right?
Yeah.
So, anyway, that's I guess my 2 cents. I wanted to kind of dive into with your answer. You did actually. You spoke of it just a second ago. You described your appearance deliberately, right? Eccentric, or eclectic is another word I like. As a way of managing your social expectations and signaling something about yourself before you have to explain it, which is nice. Um, Thinking about that, what are you communicating, and why does that kind of internal or intentional, excuse me, self presentation matter to you?
All right. So, for those who are just listening, I'll describe the way that I look. So I have had an unnatural hair color for over 10 years now. It's presently purple. I have a half sleeve of tattoos. I
Hmm.
have visible facial piercings. I started looking more alternative in college, and I actually did find a lot of freedom in that because I have had a very different like growing up overseas, growing up
Yep.
as a missionary kid and a pastor's kid, and then the fallout of that. And I used to like I actually find it very exhausting to have to go through that, and then I sort of tamed down the way I looked in my 20s, because obviously I worked a professional job. I had to look
Right.
professional
Yeah, clean up a
and
little bit.
clean, and I did.
Yeah.
They never knew that I hid my tongue piercing the entire time that I was there,
Right.
but they the decision to be more visibly alternative came sort of in my late 20s. I really embraced it in my 30s.
Mm.
One, I do like the way it looks. So
Yeah, for
I
sure.
think about, the criticism that I got in my 20s. Oh, you're putting on a,
Right.
whatever you seeing
It's
kid
a
with
it's a phase, whatever they want to say.
fake,
You'll grow out of it. And it's like, no, it's just
costume.
yeah.
And I realize it's not. It's for me. It's not a costume. It's really about if I look different from the get go, people expect me to be a little bit different, and honestly, it saves me a lot of emotional stress. Um, 'Cause the expectation is there. This is probably gonna be someone who's a little bit different between and I am, like, I have a very different career for a woman. My hobbies are a little bit different, endurance running and cycling is not a normal
Yeah.
thing that people do. Um, for years, no, this has been I did have the honor of supporting my husband when he finished, his college degree. But, we're normally it's the husband's far more educated than the wife. We're the
Yep.
absolute
Yep.
reverse. And then in addition to just not really knowing where I'm from. So a lot of those kind of like standard anchors you have for starting relationships aren't really there for me. And so when people see me and they see that I look a little bit different, they kind of expect me to be different. And then that just is that then they're surprised by how relatable I actually am instead
Exactly.
of the,
You know.
so it is deliberate both in terms of aesthetic taste, but also in terms of I am communicating to people that I am a little bit different. So don't be surprised when all of a sudden things come up like,
Yeah.
oh yeah, when I lived in Nebraska, or when I used to live in Pennsylvania. It's far less surprising. They're already expecting me to be a little bit eccentric, and I like that. And it's also I find I was a little unsure of what it would be received, now that I work with younger students, but I actually find that Um,
You got aura. That's what they
they
say.
find actually, they tell me I have a rainbow aura.
Yeah, you got a rainbow aura. Yeah.
I don't know, but that's the thing. But, like, they find it refreshing, and I've always been someone that for better or for worse, I am who I am, and I'm not really willing to change if someone doesn't like it. Like,
Yeah.
I've tamed some of that down to keep a job, but it's really just more that I'm quiet instead of that I've changed.
Yeah.
And
Good
I
change.
find that, that sort of honest presentation is actually really good for connecting with, well, with college students when I taught them, and now with high school students. Like, they know that I am pretty authentic. And unlike other teachers, if they do encroach into something that I don't feel like it's appropriate for me to talk about, instead of hiding, I'm like, I just don't think it's appropriate for me to answer that question. But understand that it's not that I'm hiding
Yeah.
anything from you. It's just I'm respecting our differences,
Mhm.
which
Yeah,
is,
yeah.
I think they like that. They like knowing that that they have someone in front of them who's maybe had a little bit of a complicated life. And my intention in that is like, I hope that they feel like if their life doesn't go to plan, that they've had an example of somebody else whose life didn't go to plan and it turned out okay.
Yep.
I want them to see that all kinds of people get to where they want to be, even if they don't always take the path that
Yep.
they expect to take.
Yeah. Yeah, I love it. I like it. Like I said, I told you before we got, I like the purple hair. I'm naturally a rebel, so I like the eccentric, different. I like that stuff. So, but that's just maybe me. So, like, I don't. I like to challenge status quo. That's just maybe the way my mind's brain like wired. I like to challenge it. I don't like conformity. Um, and your expressiveness, I think, is right. That's your own. I always tell people that's your own art. That's your own fashion. Your own expressiveness. So, like, own it. And I love that you do that. Um,
Well, and I'm married to someone who is very similar in that way. He's an
yes.
artist, but he has his flair in a different way. But and that's actually honestly being with him is part of what made me more comfortable there. And
Mhm.
that, when you have that secure anchor, it's like, yeah, we're a little eccentric, we're a little weird, but we're a little eccentric and weird together. And we both
Yeah.
think the other person's hilarious. So I mean, there you go.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree. Like I said, I support it. Like I said, I very much think people should be okay, and be authentic about it. Like, you don't have to put on this mask. You see the word authentic, and I'm like, you're being authentic. You're not putting on any mask or doing any um dancing, if you will, just to save face. Like, this is who I am. Kind of take it or leave it. Right. Not in a rude way, but just like, this is me. So, you know. All right. So let's as we wrap up here, a few more questions for you here. Um so you kind of recap everything, right? You went from fastest growing manager to at enterprise to dark matter research to environmental biophysics to building a high school program that took students to global physics conferences, all while navigating divorce, family instability, imposter syndrome in a field that did not always make you feel like you belonged. And then when you look at that whole, full arc, what do you know now about what a person is capable of building when they keep following what is true for them?
Um, I think as I look on that um full arc, I think that I think a big part of what's made my journey possible is there's a lot you can do with passion, intensity, and determination.
Mm,
Uh, and
yeah.
for me, when I figured out those were my strengths, that's what I started to use to drive me forward. And it's something, as I work with students, it's like I also like figure out your strengths and embrace them.
Hmm.
Passion, determination, and intensity may be my strengths, but they may not be your strengths. Like,
Yeah.
these are what make me a really good program builder. They also make me a little bit of a hothead, and a little bit type B. And so I, often like to work with people who are a little bit more level headed and a little bit more type A because they balance me out because I need
Yep.
those strengths from other people. And so that's what I would say, reflecting on this is that, you have to learn, what are the things about your personality that can really be used to help you get to the places that you want to get. And you have to temper that with the fact that any strength can also be your biggest weakness if you overplay it. Um,
Hmm.
And then, I think the other thing is you have to decide, what are you willing to lose to get to where you want to be? And, there's definitely, things that I've given up to have the career that I've had and to be where I'm
Yep.
at now. And I think that's something that is important to balance with all of that. But I think something that it's the first time I really talk about on this podcast, but um, I think that while passion isn't everything, I think it's a lot bigger than what people realize. Really passionate people are able to do bigger things, and
Mhm.
it can cover over some deficits within a field. I was really passionate about physics, and that drove me pretty hard on my dark days. And that's the same thing I tell my students is like find something you're passionate enough about to take a hard class that you're not going to get an A in.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
when you find that, you're in the right field. But,
Mhm.
that's what it means to really be passionate about something, is you're willing to do things even though you may not be the most successful person in it, even though it's gonna be hard and you're gonna fail at things. Like, passion really does push you forward, and that's what I've seen with, successful PhD students is they do tend to be people who are very passionate. And that will succeed over people who were maybe better on paper,
Yeah.
and not passionate. So that would be kind of my takeaway on
Yeah.
my own path.
Yeah. I love it. Passion, intensity, and determination. Yeah. I always think it's interesting too. Like you said, passion. I'm like, it's even interesting from a like a physio. Is it? I can't even say it. From a physiological.
Physiological.
Yeah, physiological. In ontological perspective, like how passion can override and push a human, understanding of like you can do more things than what you don't think you're capable of by just having like passion. Just that
Mhm.
human trait can push you to other levels or different heights. So yeah, those are good things to have. Definitely to what you're doing now. Um, a little kind of similar to what I just asked you, but maybe for someone else, for someone listening, right now, Emily, who's in a room where they, we're not expected to be carrying the weight, not being seen as the right kind of person, quote unquote, for what they're doing. What do you say to that person, or maybe some advice for them who don't feel like they belong and they're kind of carrying that weight internally?
So my advice to someone who is in a place where they don't feel like they belong, I think it would depend on what they don't feel like they belong in. If it's that they're in a
Mhm.
field they feel like they don't belong, to that I would say, um, at the end of the day, it's competence that determines whether or not you belong in a field. And you get to define, you get to decide how hard you want to work to be in that field. If you love that field and you work hard enough, then of course you belong to be there because, at the end of the day, any robust field is going to have people with all different personality types
Yep.
and backgrounds and ways that they express themselves within it. And then in a perhaps a deeper context, like if it's just you're living in a place that you feel like you don't belong socially, and this has been something that I've had to learn as someone who doesn't always fit in, is that you may just not belong everywhere.
That's
Um,
true.
and that's really just about, you've got to find your people that you feel good about, and either, you're either going to make place, I mean, kind of a couple options. You can either conform to the place, or you can make the place conform to you, or you can
Mhm.
just kind of be on the edge, or you can go someplace else.
Yeah.
And that I don't feel like I can ever tell somebody what the right decision is for themselves in that moment. But for me, I'm comfortable not belonging on that personal state. And I'm not saying it's easy, but um, that's just kind of, I find my people and I stick with my people. But in terms of a profession, nobody gets to decide whether or not you belong in that profession other than yourself. If you're willing to
Mhm.
put in the work and you love it, then you belong there. And that's that.
Right. That's all that matters. That's that. That's a good way to put a little bow on it. Yeah. All right. So my last two questions. My first one here is as we wrap up. Where can people follow your work, connect with you, and essentially what you're doing?
So I am on LinkedIn. You can find me under Emily Grace PhD. I'm not too active on social media. It's also because I work at a high school, I have to be really careful about how active I am on social media. So
Yeah.
LinkedIn is probably the best place to find me. Um, and then, if you find me on LinkedIn, then you can find out more about what I'm doing and the type of program that I'm running.
Yep.
And then, yeah, and then, you can there's also stuff that pops up from time to time when I do races, either running or biking. You'll find me probably towards the back of the list of people who finished.
As long as you finish, that's all that matters.
Well,
Yeah. Yeah.
I finish most of the time. Sometimes
Yeah.
you'll find me a list of people who didn't finish. And that's okay too.
Are you training for one right now?
Um, well, I just found out I probably have a stress fracture in my right foot, so I'm having to reevaluate my
Oh,
training at the moment.
yeah.
But I'm always kind of, thinking about things.
You're still optimistic.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. I can still do it. Yeah. Well, good. As always, I tell people who are listening, those who are tuning in, of course, we'll put your LinkedIn there in the show notes. So, people who are interested, curious, want to connect with you, stay connected. They like your story and maybe want to get connected with your work as well. So we would definitely plug that in. The last question, though, famous question on the podcast, right? We're on the Life Is podcast. So this is kind of a curveball for most people on the show. But, if I asked you, Emily, life is blank, right? And whatever word or phrase you want to fill in, what would you end with in that phrase?
Mhm.
That's curveball. I'll give you a second. Take your time.
Um, I would say life is the process of becoming who you are fully created to be.
Mm, okay. Yeah, yeah. That's I don't think we've ever had an answer similar to that. But I like the way that sounds and feels. It is like the process of in my, I guess, my interpretation, like this evolution of who you're supposed to be or what that destiny looks like. But it's an unfoldment.
Mhm.
I like that. That's good. That's a good way to wrap it up. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
That's really good. Um, at this point, we've had a good time. I truly appreciate you getting on here. I really appreciate you um trusting me. That might be the better word, because I reached out to you randomly and wanting a physicist on the show. And we live in a day and age where there's so much AI and bots and fake people. You never know who's real and who's not. So I personally appreciate you coming on here to share your journey, your story, because it very much aligns to internal coherence and um, finding that balance of becoming exactly who you want to be internally and externally. So thank you. And from here, we'll let you continue to do great work, continue to have that passion, determination, and intensity as you go forward. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, hey, you take care, Emily, and we'll see you on the other side.
All right. Thank you too.
Bye.
Bye.
Dr. Emily Grace was the fastest growing manager at Enterprise, and then she went back to school for physics, not because the path she was on was failing, but because something truer was calling. She sat in rooms where people did not expect her to stay. She stayed anyway. She built a research program that took students from 3 participants to over 50. She studied contamination in city mangroves with a laser. She was building an open source tool so that underfunded schools can ask the same questions as the institutions that get all the resources. She holds science and faith side by side without forcing them to fight. She grew up rootless, went through divorce, navigated imposter syndrome in rooms she earned the right to be in, and she kept building, not because the conditions were easy, because what she was building was true. That is not brilliance, that is internal coherence. Life expands in proportion to internal coherence, and Dr. Emily Grace has been proving that, one curious student and one honest question at a time. Until next time, I'll see you in the next episode. That's a wrap on today's episode of the Life Is podcast. If something in this conversation landed for you, a shift in perspective, a reminder, or something you needed to hear, don't let it stay there. Take it with you, put it to work. If you're ready to go deeper, I have tools built specifically for this journey, a self-discovery blueprint and a diagnostic designed to show you exactly where your foundation needs attention. Links are in the show notes. And if this episode added value, share it with someone who's building, leave a review, Help us grow this community of intentional people doing real work. Remember, fulfillment isn't found, it's built. Life is art in motion, and you are the artist. Until next time, keep building.